Well, hopefully everyone did well on the first quiz of this chapter, and now we need to move on to this legal form, and this is kind of a carryover from what we've already been talking about. But when we're dealing with real estate, anything you do, it needs to be in writing. One, it's just good business, it's professional, or it shows professionalism, and quite frankly, it's the best way to ensure that any agreements that you may have with buyers and or sellers or with other agents, it's the only way that it's going to be potentially enforceable, right? It needs to be in writing. But certainly if the contract or agreement that you're entering into or helping someone else enter into, if it is subject to the statute of frauds, then it has to be in writing if it's going to be enforceable. Okay? I know we've already talked about the statute of frauds a lot, but I promise you, coming up here shortly, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into it. Because we need to know what types of contracts are subject to the statute of frauds, which we know is a federal national law and requires documents to be in writing. It does say that most oral contracts have no evidence of the terms and conditions, which is why a lot of times it would be considered unenforceable in a courtroom. So, we need to have certainly real estate documents in writing. Okay. Now, when it comes to these, we're still talking about obviously contracts here. But you see a little section dealing with modifications, alterations, and addenda. And what we're talking about here is typically if you're making a counter offer, if you make a counter offer, then you have modified the original offer. Okay? So that we need to kind of talk about. If the seller receives an offer, and assuming they're going to counter anything, and obviously anything in the offer could be countered by one or both parties, okay? Whichever party is receiving the offer or counter offer, they can counter anything in it. But how do you do that? And this is something you got to be very careful of, because if we don't do things properly, correctly, and accurately, you could render the entire contract invalid, meaning it's no longer enforceable, even though it's in writing. There are things you could do, or in some cases not do, that could render the contract invalid because you were not being diligent. And that's I want to touch on some of those things here right now. But when you make a modification or a counter offer, let me sort of show you something, if I can write on this. Let's see. The one thing you could expect the seller to counter, if they counter anything, is going to be the price. So let's just look at that. Let's say the buyer offered $200,000 for the property, okay? But the seller's thinking that's not enough. I got to have 220. Well, then that's going to be a counter offer, right? And the way you would do that, you would just draw a line through whatever it is you're trying to change or modify, and then somewhere over it, below it, but somewhere around it, write in what you want it to be, what your counter is. And so in this case, we'll say we want it to be $225,000. But then it says, for every modification or change that you make to the offer, it has to be initialed and dated. So basically I put my initials here, and whatever the date is, 7/9/24, whatever the date is, you would put it there. Okay? That's how you make a modification or a counter offer, if you will. And obviously anything else in the offer that you decide that you don't like or want to change, you do it the same way. Draw a line through it, basically saying this is not acceptable, and then write in whatever it is you want to change it to. But then when the other party receives the counteroffer, they can look through the pages and see what changes or modifications the other party has made. And so if I'm the buyer and I get this back, I can see they've countered the price. They've upped the price up to $225. And now, remember you have three options here, because once you make a counter, you've now rendered this entire contract, or in this case offer, you've now rendered it voidable by the buyer, because that's one of the options now the buyer has once you make that counter offer. They could reject it and just say, you know what, we're done. You know what, now the entire offer and or contract is void. It's as if it never even existed. So can the seller come back now and say, all right, well, we're just kidding, we'll take the $200? No. You can't say you'll take $200, because by law, you never had an offer for $200. So you can't accept an offer that never existed, because you voided the contract, or at least the seller rendered it voidable. And when that buyer decided to reject it, that now made it void. It's over. You're done, seller. So, again, and I know I talked about this in the last hour, but look, if you need to make a counteroffer, make it. If it's just totally not acceptable the way the offer is, make the counteroffer. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't. But what I am pleading and trying to convince you of is that, if you have an acceptable offer, you better think long and hard before you try to squeeze just a couple more drops out of it, because you could lose the entire thing. And if you're willing to accept that risk of losing something you have acceptable in your hand, then do it. But I think it's our responsibility as the agent to make sure our buyer and or seller understand what they're doing. Because I'm afraid, in fact, I know a lot of times they're just saying, well, I make the counter, and if they don't like it, then we'll just come back to what they originally had. And it doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. All right. But let's just say in this example, the buyer says, you know what, I want the house. They did come off it a little bit. Maybe they had it listed for $235. Now they've agreed to come down to $225. I'll accept that. I want to buy it. So how do we signify that the buyer accepts the counter offer? Buyer, all you have to do is initial and date the change. So you see where the seller did their initial and date, then I'll come right out beside it, over it, below it somewhere, and I'll initial and date it as well. So once you have all parties, meaning all sellers and all buyers. Now, who is all sellers? Well, maybe you got a husband and wife that owns it. They own it together. Well, you can't just have one or the other just putting the initials. If there's two owners, then both owners must initial and date the change. If there's two buyers, or if there's 10 buyers, regardless of how many there are, all parties have to initial and date. If one party does not initial and date a change, the contract is not valid, meaning it's not enforceable. And this is what I was saying just a moment ago, that if you're not careful, you can unintentionally render a contract invalid. That is not a good idea in this profession. If something goes wrong, one party backs out and there's nothing the other party can do about it because you rendered the contract invalid because you weren't being careful, you weren't being diligent, you weren't ensuring everything was done properly. People are going to be frowning upon you, to say the least. So we got to make sure all parties, test purposes, you need to know that for test purposes, and for practical purposes, it's got to be initialed and dated by all parties. then that signifies acceptance. It's now valid. Okay. But y'all, when I say this, y'all, usually when things go bad here, it's unintentional, where maybe one of the sellers, either the husband or the wife, if you have multiple owners, y'all, everybody fully intended to accept it. It's just, y'all, when you're dealing with these contracts, a lot of times there's just a lot of places you got to initial and date. Y'all, it could be a lot of places. And sometimes you just skip it. Y'all, you just missed it. Just skipped over it. Didn't mean to. You just skipped over it. And nobody paid any attention and didn't notice it. Well, again, if any initial and date is missing by any party in any area of that contract, then the contract is invalid. Okay? Because it has not been fully accepted. So, y'all, you got to be careful about this kind of stuff. So that's how you make counter offers, or what we're referring to here as modifications. You know, if you're modifying or changing the original offer. Now, the next thing you need to understand about this stuff, you know, once the contract has been fully accepted by all parties, y'all, everybody's initialed and dated everything. So everything's been fully accepted. All the terms have been agreed upon. Y'all, at that point, the contract is considered ratified. Y'all, ratified just means that all the terms have been agreed upon by all the parties. Now the contract is ratified. Well, what does that mean? Why does that matter? It matters. Y'all, once the contract is ratified, y'all, and please hear this, test purposes and certainly for practical purposes, you cannot make changes or modifications to a ratified contract. Y'all, once it's all agreed upon, that's it. You cannot go back in the contract and make other changes to it. Y'all, I'm telling you, at least in my market, you see that happen all the time. And what I'm not sure about, are they doing it out of ignorance because they don't know any better? Or are they doing it just out of laziness because they don't want to take the additional steps that are really required at this point? But y'all, look, no matter which answer is correct here, y'all, neither one of them good. It's pretty bad, but y'all, here's how it has to happen. Y'all, could the buyer and the seller both agree, you know what, we need to change this. This didn't work for really very well for either one of us. Let's just change something in the contract. Well, y'all, you can change things. You can agree to additional things after it's ratified. It's just you can't do it in the ratified contract. Y'all, at this point, y'all, now we have to have addendums. It's an addendum is, y'all, it's a separate piece of paper. It's separate from the original contract. But you will, on the addendum, you will reference this is a change or modification to the ratified contract. Y'all, you have to put in the information in there to indicate what contract this addendum should be part of. And then you just write in the addendum whatever it is the parties want to change or modify. And then obviously both parties sign and date the addendum. And then you attach the addendum to the ratified contract. You just can't do it in the contract. You got to have that separate sheet of paper. We call it an addendum. Write it up and attach it to it, and we're good to go. But y'all, if you modify a ratified contract, that also can render the entire contract invalid. Don't do that. Don't do it. It can cause you problems down the road. So, y'all, that's why I was saying I'm not sure when people do it, and I'm telling you, I see it all the time, again, in my market. Hopefully you don't see it so much in yours, but if you do, y'all, we need to clean this up. Because sooner or later this is going to, if you don't learn how to do things the right way, sooner or later it's going to come back and bite you big time. And unfortunately, the person paying the price for it is probably going to be your client. And that is not a good situation. I'm just telling you right now. So y'all don't be lazy. Just get you another piece of paper. Y'all, the addendum, not just any piece of paper. Y'all get an addendum. Write up whatever you need to in the addendum, sign and date it, and then attach it. Don't try to just write it in the contract. All right. I think I beat that up enough. But then obviously we got to make sure that all parties sign the agreement. We talked about that. And then obviously, anytime someone is signing contracts, initialing, dating contract, whatever they're doing, it has to be consensual. If someone is being forced into it or being pressured into it, they might have signed it, but that it was not consensual. They felt pressured into it. That is not valid. That is unenforceable if it's not consensual. And believe it or not, that happens. I see it all the time. In fact, where I see it mostly, just to tell you, it's usually children that are trying to force their parents into selling their house. Maybe they got elderly parents and they want their parents to either move in with them so they can help take care of them or whatever, or they want to get them moved into an assisted living or something like that. But typically it's with elderly parents. And a lot of times these elders, they don't want to move. This is my house and I'm staying right here and I'm going to die right here. Old people get kind of cantankerous like that, I guess. But and I understand most of the time. Now, I don't believe this is every time, but I think a lot of times the children are trying to act. They're trying to act out of love. They care for their parents and they want the best for their parents. And they try to force and pressure their parents into doing something they just don't want to do. They just don't want to do it. Well, you may force them into signing it, but if they didn't do it consensually, it's not enforceable. So just keep that in mind. Okay, let's move on to something else here. So here we go. We've been talking now for probably an hour and a half keep talking about this statute of frauds. Well, here we go. Now let's kind of get into this a little bit. Again, the statute of frauds is a federal law that basically says this: any type of contract that is subject to the statute of frauds, excuse me, must be in writing if you would expect it to be enforceable in court. If it's not in writing and it is subject to the statute of frauds, it's unenforceable, meaning basically it's invalid. So, given that, what types of contracts are subject to the statute of frauds? Meaning, what has to be in writing? Well, you see there are basically 4 types of contracts that are subject to this provision or this act. And the first one, any contracts involving the sale or transfer of land. That's real estate. So any type of real estate contract or agreement that deals with the sale or the transfer of land, it is subject to the statute of frauds, so we know it has to be in writing. That's why contracts of sale must be in writing. And that's the main one we care about, but just so we know what other contracts they might be referring to. Number 2, contracts to answer for the debt or duty of another. Things like power of attorney. If you're going to have authority to act on behalf of someone else, sign legal documents on behalf of someone else, that's subject to the statute of frauds, again, must be in writing. And then the third one there, contracts that cannot be completed within 1 year. Now that's kind of interesting there because, actually because of that provision, that means there's actually one type of real estate contract that can be oral. Not suggesting it should be, but it could be oral and still be enforceable in court. And if you haven't already guessed what that is, an oral lease for up to 1 year is still enforceable. Because it does not become subject to the statute of frauds until it's at least a year old. But if you got a lease and it's older than 1 year and it's still not in writing, it's no longer enforceable under this statute. So basically what number that third bullet is saying, oral leases are still valid, meaning enforceable for up to 1 year. Okay? You might need to know that for test purposes. Oral leases are legal, they are valid, and they are enforceable for up to 1 year, according to the statute of frauds. And then the fourth bullet, is saying that any contracts for sale of goods valued at $500 or more. What they're talking about here is personal property. If you're selling or conveying personal property that is valued at $500 or more, then that also has to be in writing. That becomes subject to the statute of frauds. Well, what do we call that agreement for personal property? We call that a bill of sale, right? So if you're selling your car for $2,000 or $10,000, whatever your car is worth, if it's more than $500, then you have to, you must provide what we call a bill of sale, for it to be enforceable, right? Now, we kind of need to talk about this a little bit here. Contracts of sale, and this is not on the slide, it's not in your book right now, but I want you to understand something. Contract law states that you can only convey real property via contract of sale. So when the buyer and seller sign that contract of sale, the only thing that's going to be conveying legally and what would be enforceable would be real property. Remember, now we talked about real property in an earlier chapter. Remember, what is real property? Land and everything attached to it. Now, so obviously if there's a house on the land, then the house is also considered real property. You also recall we talked about there's really only two types of property you can own. It's either real or it's personal. It's got to be one of the two. And when you're conveying property through a contract of sale, the only property you can convey is real property. What did we just say you would have to use to convey personal property? A bill of sale. Again, in my market, agents are either acting ignorantly or lazily. And again, I don't know which would be worse, but what you see this all the time where the buyer's agent will write in the contract of sale that they won't, asking the seller to leave items of personal property at no charge or whatever. But basically just wanting them to leave it and include it with the purchase. The most common item you tend to see, like the refrigerator. Most refrigerators are considered personal property. And a lot of times the buyer would like the seller to leave it. So they just write that into the contract. Seller agrees to convey or leave refrigerator at no charge. Something like that. You hear it a lot. And oftentimes the seller will agree to it. Now here's the good news. Even though we put this in the contract to sale, and the seller agrees to it, actually, before we even get into the good news, let me make sure we understand this. Y'all, if the seller agreed to it, y'all, it's in the contract. They agreed to it. And then we close, and then the buyer goes to move in after closing, and they find the seller took the refrigerator. They did not leave that refrigerator. Well, is there anything the buyer can do about it? Not likely. Not likely. Because you did not have a valid or enforceable conveyancing document. Yeah, they agreed to leave it, but they agreed to leave it on a document that's not valid. Not for personal property. Y'all, that's what I was saying just a moment ago. You can only convey and make it enforceable. You can only convey real property in the contract to sale. Any personal property you want to include must be on a bill of sale. Y'all, that makes the personal property enforceable. But if you just try to put the personal property in the contract to sale, y'all, the parties may do as they agreed. Y'all, and by the way, that's the good news. Typically, if the seller just agreed to leave it, then they will leave it. But I got to tell you, I would be willing to bet the only reason the seller's leaving it is because they believe they have to, because the seller doesn't know any better. The seller's probably thinking, well, I agreed to it. It's right there in the contract. I agreed to leave it, so I have to leave it. But I think a lot of times if the seller actually knew that what they agreed to is not enforceable, I bet they would take it. And sooner or later, I'm afraid if we keep doing things the wrong way, again, it's going to come back and bite you. Y'all, sooner or later, you're going to have a seller that knows better. Yeah, I know it's in the contract, but I also know it's not enforceable in the contract to sale because you never had a bill of sale to go with it. So, y'all, the point I'm trying to make, real property is all you can sell or convey in the contract of sale. Y'all, you need to have a bill of sale. Y'all, and it says bill of sale right on the top of the form, and then put on, again, reference the contract of sale that this pertains to. You make reference to it. And y'all just fill in the blank, okay? You just fill in the blank, but then you write in what personal property you want to convey. And then you would take the bill of sale and attach it to the contract of sale. Y'all, that's two standalone separate contracts. It's just one's for personal property, one's for real property. Y'all, I hope that makes sense. I know I went round and round on that, but y'all, that's just a big deal. But certainly make sure you understand what I just said for test purposes, and to keep you out of trouble, you better remember it for practical purposes. All right, now let's talk about communicating these offers, counter offers. Y'all, they're saying, y'all, in fact, I've had people say, well, is a counter offer actually considered an offer? Yeah, that's why they call it a counter offer. So what we're talking about right now includes any kind of offer, whether it be just the original offer or any counter offers after that. All that's included. But it says all offers must be in writing. Y'all, again, statute of frauds. If you're dealing with this conveyance of land, real estate, it's got to be in writing. Yeah, and I have people who will ask me this question too, and quite frankly, a lot of times even veteran agents can't seem to understand what I'm about to try to explain to you. Where I think a lot of agents make a mistake is we've lost the ability to negotiate. I just don't see it much anymore. It's very rare. And to me, that's very sad, because when you have a real estate agent that does not understand the art of negotiation, does not know how to negotiate, that's probably, in my opinion, I would be willing to bet that's the number one reason deals fall apart and never close. because we don't know we don't know how to negotiate stuff. We don't know how to make things happen. And that's sad. And you need to know how to do that if you're truly representing the best interest of your client. Now, y'all, what I hear agents tell me, well, when I make a counter offer, that's a form of negotiating. No, it's not. No, it's not. Y'all, a counter offer is not negotiating. It's a counter offer. There is no negotiating with a counter offer. But what I keep trying to make people, or trying to get agents to understand, is this. First of all, you should never counter offer or make a counter offer before you negotiate it. Y'all, how do you know what to counter until you know what might be feasible and what might not be feasible, right? Y'all, let me just give you an example real quick. Say the seller has already told me they want $200,000 is their bottom line. That's the lowest they're willing to go. I want $200,000. So when we get to closing, I want $200,000 out of this deal. Okay? So Frankie, you negotiate whatever kind of way you have to, as long as at the end of the day, when the numbers are added up, I got $200,000 when we close. Y'all, and the seller needs to be able to give you that number. They need to, you need to know what's the bottom line, and obviously anything higher than that is just gravy. But I need to know what's the bottom line, what's the floor here, in order to negotiate. Well, let's say, for example, we get an offer for $200,000, which is exactly what the seller said they wanted. But that's what they want to take home with them, right? Well, you got an offer for $200,000, which is a full price offer, if you will. But then as you read through it, you notice, well, the buyer is also asking the seller to pay up to $5,000 in closing costs for the buyer. I also see in here the buyer is asking my seller to pay for a home warranty. And that's another $800. I'm making up numbers, but there's another $800. So all of a sudden, if my seller accepts this offer, they're not going to walk away from closing with the $200,000 they said was the bottom line, right? Because now you got to subtract from that $200,000 the $5,000 in closing costs, $800 for a home warranty. And there might be other stuff they're asking for throughout the contract. So you can't just look at just the sales price. What else involved in some of these other terms or provisions that are going to basically change that net sales price? But here's what agents will do. They'll say, all right, well, we could accept the offer of $200,000, but buyer, you're going to have to pay your own closing costs. So what the agents will do, they will just go ahead and counter back, basically saying, leaving the $200,000 there, but they counter back saying, no, buyer, you have to pay your own closing costs. Buyer, you're going to have to pay for your own home warranty, right? And then that puts us right back where we want to be. That would be acceptable. Well, what you just did, listing agent, by making that counter, you probably killed any chance of this deal closing. Because what you did not know when you made that counter offer, the buyer does not have $5,000 for closing costs. They can't do it. So if the seller does not agree to pay the buyer's closing cost, the buyer cannot do it. So they just, well, we're done. We can't, it's rejected. And you didn't even try to make the deal work in that scenario. But if you just negotiate, what is negotiate? Just talk to the other side. And and if it's what I do a lot of times, I'll call the other, if we're, again, using the same scenario, I'll contact the buyer's agent and I say, look, and I always try to keep things upbeat and positive. So I start up and say, look, thank you for your offer. and thank you for making a reasonable, a good offer. But I just wanted to talk to you for a minute because there are some things we will have to change in order to make the deal work. And we want to make sure it works for both. Obviously, I want it to work for my client, but I want it obviously to work for your client as well. So let's see if we can find some common area here. The $200,000 obviously is good, the sales price. But the $5,000 you're asking in closing cost, how big a deal is that to your buyer? And I'll ask them that. I mean, how big a deal is that? Or is that a big deal? And more times than not, they'll say, Frankie, it's absolutely critical to the deal. My buyer cannot get the loan if the seller does not agree to pay those closing costs. The lender will not loan the money. I'm telling you, that's common. Okay, so if the deal's going to work, what we now know is seller will have to pay the closing costs for the buyer. That's it. There's really nothing to negotiate there. So why would you counter back saying we're not going to do that? You might as well just reject the offer, right? But yet, let's see if we can't make this thing work. And I said, all right, well, I'll tell you what. Okay, what if we agree to pay the closing cost, but we increase the sales price from $200,000 to $205,000? That gets my seller what he needed out of the deal. And yeah, it does create a little bit more than, your buyer is paying a little bit more. But if you actually crunch the numbers, Don, again, I'm making up numbers right now. At $200,000, your payment would have been $1,000 a month. But at $205,000, it's going to be $1,010 a month. So it's not going to really affect your payment that much because it's just, when you're only talking a few $1,000s spread out over, say, a 30-year term, there's really not a lot of difference in how much the payment's going to be. So the big deal is we got your closing costs paid for, buyer. We just need you to agree to basically pay a few more dollars per month in your payment. Could we make that work? Yep, Frankie, I think that'll work. Yep, we can do that. That's what negotiating is. And now once I have an idea of what we can do, now I know how to make the counter. Now you make the counter offer. That's the way this is supposed to work. If you're ever just making counter offers and you don't sit down with the other party to see what'll work. Now, I will also tell you there have been times when it's just not going to work. Maybe if I come back to them and say, when I told them we'll go to 205 and then we'll pay your closing costs, Frankie, the most the lender's willing to go was $200,000. So that's the most they can pay. And the seller has to pay the closing cost or this buyer cannot get the loan. Well, if that's just not going to work, which my seller says that's not going to work, then sometimes we just have to say, we tried. Thank you very much. Shake hands. Wish you well on the next one, and we're going to move on to the next buyer. But again, sometimes you just can't come to an agreement, for whatever reason. But just to start making counter offers, that's insanity. And by the way, where I was trying to go with this, obviously the negotiating is you do either in person or by phone or whatever. But when you get ready to make the counter offer, then that has to be in writing, okay? What we've agreed to verbally is not valid, it's not enforceable. We're just trying to negotiate, and hopefully both sides are negotiating in good faith. And then if we can come to some agreement, now we'll memorialize that agreement by making the counter offer, right? And that's all in writing. Now, this next bullet, it says that offers can be withdrawn without penalty prior to notification of acceptance. Let's talk about that. That's important too. Certainly for test purposes, but also for real world purposes. Is it possible a seller might make an offer on a house and then shortly after making the offer, they're getting cold feet? You know what? I'm just not sure this is the right house for me. I'm not ready to get in this much debt yet. I want to back out. Well, once you make that offer, can the buyer in fact back out of the deal? Well, it says here clearly they can, as long as the offer they made has that they have not been notified that the seller has accepted the offer yet. Okay? Now, once you've been notified, we've accepted your offer. Congratulations, we'll see you at the closing table. Y'all, once you've been notified of acceptance, you cannot back out of it at that time, or not without penalty. Okay? Penalty meaning it's going to cost you some money to get out of it now. Typically the earnest money, but at any rate, it's going to cost you some money. So, y'all, here's why this is important. Number one, if you're the listing agent, you cannot be dragging your feet or procrastinating on this. At the moment your seller accepts the offer, they signed it, it's accepted. The law does say the initial notification of acceptance can be by any means that you can show that it's been accepted. In other words, I can call them, I can text them, I can email them, whatever. But and I typically will text or email to follow. Let me rephrase that. I will call them and then immediately I will submit something like an email or a text basically saying, congratulations, we've accepted your offer. Then I'll say, and I will get you a copy of the accepted contract within the hour or whatever, as soon as I can. But I just want to go ahead and notify you right now, let you know it's been accepted and thank you very much. At the moment that notification's been made, now the buyer cannot back out or withdraw without penalty. But if the buyer decides to back out before they've been notified, then they can back out without penalty. They get their earnest money back and whatever. But this is why, if you're that listing agent, and I'm telling you, a lot of this happens. I get these calls all the time. Frankie, what am I supposed to do now? Because the seller accepted the offer, but maybe the listing agent got tied up doing other things, and maybe it was a few hours later or a little bit later in the day that they finally get around to sending or notifying the buyer's agent that it's been accepted. That could be several hours. Well, a lot of things can happen during that time. Is it possible that the seller accepted the offer, the listing agent, for whatever reason, did not immediately notify the other side that it's been accepted, and in the meantime, the buyer decided to rescind their offer? Can they do that? Yes. And every time the seller said, but I've already accepted the offer. Yes, you did, but you never notified the buyer that it was accepted. It doesn't matter that you accepted it at 10 in the morning, because you may have never notified them before we got notice that it's been rescinded. Maybe at lunchtime, the buyer decided to rescind their offer. And they can do that without penalty because they were never notified that it was accepted. I hope that makes sense. And this is why, everything we do in real estate, it must be done promptly. You cannot be dragging your feet here. You got to do it now. Because, I'm just telling you, you drag your feet, you get lazy, you get complacent, bad things are going to happen. I promise you that. All right, the next thing you see here are multiple offers. And I assume you understand, everybody knows what multiple offers means. But actually I better just make sure. Y'all, multiple offers mean you've gotten at least 2 or more offers on the property, typically right around the exact same time. Y'all, in fact, we went through a period here. It's not as bad as it was, but we went through a 3 or 4 year period, at least in my market. Y'all, I mean, the moment the for sale sign went in the yard, bam. Y'all, we were getting 15, 20. Y'all, I even talked to some agents got over 100 offers on a property. Y'all, that's how quick properties were selling there for a while. Things have slowed down right now. But anyway, so we need to talk about how to handle these multiple offers. And I will tell you, I wish I could spend more time on this because I think we need it, but I don't have the time to get into too far into the weeds here, and it's not going to be that much is not going to be testable anyway. But I'm telling you, y'all, you better understand what you're doing when you receive multiple offers. First of all, how do you handle multiple offers? Well, I will tell you 2 things you better note here. One, you better know what your state license law requires. Okay? Y'all, this could differ from state to state. Again, we will address it more specifically when we get into to the state-specific portion of this course. But I will tell you what seems to be a common provision in the law when it comes to multiple offers. Y'all, it may say, for example, that multiple offers must be handled in any manner in which the agent and their client, y'all, the seller, have agreed. Y'all, that's a big deal right there. So anyway, that's what is a very common provision in a lot, if not most states, okay? But the other thing you better know and keep in mind is, what does your company policy require you to do? Y'all, at the end of the day, and what it's saying in the law, y'all, the law does not identify a specific requirement on how to handle multiple offers. Here it's just saying you must handle it in any manner that you and your client have agreed to, okay? Now, each company must or should have a company policy. Basically say it whether you're a broker or your broker in charge, whatever the title you use in your state. They will have to come up with a policy on, if we receive multiple offers in our office, then here's how we handle it. And there could be, there's no right or wrong here as long as it's agreed to by your client. But a common policy, at least in my market, is if we receive multiple offers, then we will notify all the buyer agents we now have multiple offers. And at this point, we're going to give you 24 hours or 48 hours if you choose to make what they might refer to as their best and final offer. And then once everybody submits their best and final offer, then we'll choose whichever one we think is best for the seller. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's that company's policy. My policy might be that we're not going to notify anybody of anything. We're just going to take the best offer we currently have, see if we can negotiate a deal that works for both of us, and then we're done. I've actually had agents come and say, but Frank, you never told me there were multiple offers. Okay, well, I don't have to. And then they want to try to argue it. Yes, you do. It's the law. Well, no, it's not the law. It may be your company's policy that you have to do it, whatever it is you have to do. But I'm not in your company, and I don't have to comply with your company's policies. I comply with my company's policies, and my policies are compliant with what the law requires, just like yours is. So, again, the point here is, not everybody has to do everything the same way. But when it comes to multiple offers, again, number one, make sure you know what the law says in your state regarding multiple offers, and what is your company's policy in regards to handling multiple offers. And then you have to handle it just exactly that way. Okay? But then make sure your client knows what your policies are. And typically I find, if these are things you discuss up front with the seller, for example, I might say, now seller, let's just talk about the potential of multiple offers. If we receive more than one offer, then here's our policy on how we handle that. And then I'll go over with the seller what our policy is. This is how we handle it. Now, seller, are you okay with that? Are you okay handling it this way if we receive multiple offers? I don't remember ever having somebody, no, I don't like that. Typically say, yep, that sounds reasonable to me. I'm fine with that. Where you do tend to see problems is when you don't go over what your policy is until the offers start coming in. And now you're trying to convince the seller we want to do it the way our policy said. And say, oh, no, I don't want to do it that way. I want to turn this into a bidding war. And sometimes a bidding war will work out in your favor, but I'm telling you, more times than not, that greed is going to cost you everything. It's not going to work out. Know the law and know your company's policies regarding multiple offers.